Ethan Cole had not held a woman's hand in 7 years, not since he laid one in the cold ground and walked away from everything that made him human. So when he found Charlotte Bennett collapsed on the ridge trail, bleeding and alone, every instinct told him to ride on. He almost did. Then she opened her eyes. And in that single moment, the most feared man in the Montana mountains felt something crack open inside his chest that no winter had ever touched. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel, hit that bell, and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Montana Territory, summer 1886. The morning Ethan Cole found her, he had been awake since before dawn, the way he always was. Sleep never came easy on the mountain. It never had, not in 7 years. Not since the night everything changed and left him with nothing but a ranch he worked out of habit and a silence he had learned to call peace. He rode the North Ridge alone the way he rode every trail. His horse, a dark bay named Cutter, moved without being told. The animal knew the path better than most men knew their own names. Ethan let him walk. He didn't push. There was no reason to hurry. There was no one waiting. That was the life he had built. That was the life he had chosen. And he had told himself every single morning for 7 years that it was enough. He was still telling himself that when Cutter stopped. The horse didn't shy or spook. He simply halted right there on the switchback above the eastern canyon and refused to move forward. Ethan felt it before he saw it. A change in the air. Something wrong. He scanned the trail ahead. At first he saw nothing. Just rock and dry summer grass and the long drop into the valley below. Then he saw the boot. One small leather boot half hidden beneath a boulder that had shed itself from the upper ridge sometime in the night. Ethan dismounted. He didn't run. He never ran. But his stride changed. Something in his chest tightened in a way he didn't have a name for anymore, and he crossed the distance in seconds. She was lying on her side, one arm stretched out above her head like she had reached for something and missed. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. Her face was half pressed into the dirt, and there was dried blood along her hairline, dark against skin that was far too pale for midsummer. Ethan crouched beside her. "Hey!" His voice came out rougher than he intended. It always did. He'd gone days without speaking to another human being so many times that the sound of his own words felt foreign sometimes. "Hey, wake up." She didn't move. He pressed 2 fingers to the side of her throat, the way he'd learned to do for injured animals on the mountain. Her pulse was there, weak but steady. He exhaled something he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "You ain't dead," he said mostly to himself. Then she moved. Her fingers curled slowly against the ground. Her eyelids tightened. A small sound escaped her lips. Not quite a word, not quite a cry. Something caught between the two. And then she opened her eyes. They were dark brown, and even half-conscious, even cracked and frightened and confused, they were the most awake eyes Ethan Cole had seen in years. Like there was something burning in her that the fall and the heat and the blood and the fear hadn't managed to put out yet. She stared up at him. He stared back. "Please," she whispered. The word was barely sound, more like breath shaped into a direction. "Please, I don't want to die out here alone." Ethan said nothing for a long moment. He looked at her, at the blood, at the torn dress, at the way her hand was still curled into the dirt like she was trying to hold on to the earth itself. He looked back up the ridge at the trail that continued north toward his ranch, and then back down at her. Every man in the valley had a version of Ethan Cole in their heads. The one who didn't come to town, the one who didn't make conversation, the one who would help if you were in trouble, but would not sit down to supper with you afterward, the one who had walls around him so tall that most people had stopped trying to look over them. He had built those walls himself. He was proud of them. "Damn," he said quietly. Then he slid one arm under her knees and another behind her back and lifted her off the ground like she weighed nothing at all. Her name was Charlotte Bennett. He didn't learn that right away. She drifted in and out of consciousness the whole ride back, her head against his chest, and her breathing shallow but consistent, and he focused on keeping Cutter steady and not jostling her more than necessary. He focused on that instead of the way her weight felt in his arms. Instead of the fact that he hadn't held another person this close in 7 years, and his body didn't know what to do with it, he brought her to this ranch, laid her on the cot in the back room, the room he used for supply storage, the only room with a proper bed besides his own. He boiled water. He cleaned the cut along her hairline. It was shallow, more dramatic looking than dangerous. She'd hit her head on the fall, but nothing was broken. Her wrists and palms were scraped raw from catching herself on the rocks. She slept through most of it. When she finally came fully awake, the sun was already slanting gold through the west-facing window, and the worst of the afternoon heat had passed. Ethan was sitting in the wooden chair in the corner of the room, not watching her exactly. He'd been mending a length of harness leather, working his hands the way he always did when sitting still got to be too much. He heard the change in her breathing first. Then the rustle of movement. Where? Her voice stopped. Started again. Where am I? My ranch, Ethan said. North Ridge, about 4 miles from where I found you. She turned her head toward him. He could see her taking stock, taking in the room, the cot, the unfamiliar walls, the unfamiliar man sitting in the corner with a leather strap across his knee. He watched the calculation happening behind her eyes. Fear testing the edges, then pulling back. You found me, she said. My horse found you. I just followed. A pause. Thank you, she said. Quiet and direct, like she meant it without decoration. You got a name? He asked. Charlotte Bennett. She pushed herself up onto one elbow, and he watched the wince cross her face when she moved too fast. Charlotte. Or Charlie if you prefer. Ethan Cole. She nodded like she was filing it. Your ranch, mine. How long was I out there? He thought about it. Best I can figure since sometime last night. Maybe early this morning. The blood was dry when I found you. Her jaw tightened. Not fear, something else. Anger maybe. Or the effort of not letting the fear show. My wagon, she said. My supplies. What about them? They're gone. I had a wagon loaded with goods. I was traveling up from Millhaven. I'm opening a shop in Ridgecrest. Baked goods, preserves, handwork. Everything I own is in that wagon. She stopped, started again with more control. Everything I had. Someone took it. I heard them on the road in the dark, and I ran into the rocks, and I fell. Ethan looked at her steadily. You see who it was? Too dark. How many? 2 voices, maybe 3. He nodded slowly. He had a good idea who worked that stretch of road after dark. It wasn't hard to guess. You're from the city, he said. It wasn't a question. Her chin lifted. A small motion, but he caught it. St. Louis, yes. Long way from St. Louis. I know that. Long way to come just to open a shop. I know that too. Her voice had an edge now. Not hostile, firm, like she was used to people saying exactly that and had learned not to flinch at it. I'm not asking for your opinion on the decision, Mr. Cole. I'm asking if there's any way to recover what was taken from me. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. He hadn't used that expression in so long, it felt like a muscle he wasn't sure still worked. I'll ask around, he said. She held his gaze. I'm serious. That wagon was my entire start, my savings, my inventory. If I don't get it back, I have nothing to open with, nothing to begin with at all. I heard you. A long pause. I can pay you, she said. Not right now, but once I get the shop running, I can. I didn't say I wanted payment. Then what do you want? He looked at her. Really looked at her the way he hadn't looked at another person in longer than he could clearly remember. Not past them, not around them, at them. Nothing, he said. Just rest. You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest. She opened her mouth, closed it. Something shifted in her expression, the edge going softer, not gone, but banked. I'm not someone who takes charity well, she said. It's not charity, Ethan said. It's a roof and a cot. There's a difference. She seemed to consider that. All right, she said finally. He set the harness leather aside and moved toward the door. "Mr. Cole." He stopped. "I meant it," Charlotte said. "Thank you for not riding past me." Ethan didn't turn around. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "You don't know what kind of trouble you just rode into." He walked out and let the door close behind him. The next morning she was already awake when he came in from the barn. That surprised him. Most people slept late on the mountain, especially after trauma. The altitude alone wore a person down. But Charlotte Bennett was sitting at his kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a tin mug, and somehow he had no idea how she had found the coffee tin and the pot and made a full brew before he'd come inside. She looked up when he entered. "I made enough for two," she said. "I hope that's acceptable." He looked at the pot, looked at her, looked back at the pot. "Acceptable," he said. He poured himself a mug and sat across from her at the table. It was the first time in years that another person had sat at that table. The wood felt different under his elbows. The room sounded different with two people breathing in it. He did not say any of that. "I want to help," Charlotte said. "While I'm here, I'm not a person who sits and waits well." "What kind of help?" "Whatever needs doing. Cooking, cleaning, repairs. I'm not fragile, Mr. Cole, regardless of what yesterday looked like. Yesterday you were unconscious on my mountainside. And today I'm not." She met his eyes. "I'd like to contribute. Fairly. If I'm going to stay here until we find my wagon, or until I can arrange another way into Ridgecrest, I want to earn that." He studied her for a moment. The cut on her hairline had been cleaned, and the swelling had gone down. The color was back in her face. She held herself straight at the table, shoulders back, hands steady around the mug. She looked like someone who had fallen off a mountain and gotten up and decided not to let it define her. "The east fence needs mending," he said. "2 posts rotted through. I've been meaning to get to it. Show me where the supplies are, and I'll start this morning." He blinked. "You know how to mend fence." "I know how most things work," she said simply. "I learn what I don't know." He drank his coffee. "All right," he said. She was better at it than he expected. Not perfect, she'd clearly never handled a post hole digger before, and she used more effort than necessary on the first one, but she figured it out without being told twice, and she didn't complain once about the heat, or the work, or the muscle ache he knew she had to be feeling. He worked alongside her. Or rather, he worked his end of the fence while she worked hers, and every so often he would drift close enough to correct something, or pass her a tool, and then drift back. It wasn't conversation. Not exactly. But it was the closest thing to comfortable silence he'd shared with another person since before the grief took hold of him. Around midday she stopped and straightened and looked out across the valley below the ridge. "It's beautiful," she said. Not to him, not really, just saying it because it was true. He glanced at the view. He didn't see it the way she did anymore. Hadn't for years. The mountain was just the mountain to him. A place to be. A place to survive. "I suppose," he said. "You've been up here a long time. 7 years. Alone." He picked up a tool that didn't need picking up. "More or less," he said. She didn't push. She went back to the fence post. He noticed that. The not pushing. He didn't say anything about it, but he noticed. That evening she cooked supper, without asking, without announcing it. He came in from checking the water troughs to find her at his stove, a cast iron pan going, and something that smelled like it had actual intention behind it. He stood in the doorway. "You don't have to." "I know," she said without turning around. "I wanted to." He sat at the table. She put a plate in front of him a few minutes later. Pan bread and salt pork and something she'd done with dried herbs from the shelf he didn't even know she'd found. It was the best meal that table had seen in 7 years, and the bar wasn't high, but it cleared it by a wide margin. They ate without talking much. Halfway through, Charlotte said, "You mentioned trouble, yesterday, when you left the room." Ethan kept eating. "You said I didn't know what trouble I'd ridden into." He set down his fork. "Crawford," he said. William Crawford. He owns the bottom third of this valley, and he's been working on the top third for 2 years. Any stranger that comes through this area he notices. Any stranger who might be planning to put down roots, he notices more. Charlotte was quiet. You said you're opening a shop in Ridgecrest. Ethan continued. There's a building on the main street that's been empty for 6 months. Crawford wants it. He wants everything on that street. He's been running off anyone who might compete with his interests. Is he the one who took my wagon? I don't know yet, but I wouldn't be surprised. She set down her own fork. Then I need to get to Ridgecrest and establish my claim before he can do anything about it. I signed a lease on that building. I have the paper. Do you have the paper with you? A pause. Short, but he caught it. It was in the wagon, she said. Ethan looked at her. Then Crawford's already got it, he said quietly. The color drained from her face for just a moment, then came back. She picked up her fork. Not if he doesn't know what it is, she said. A lease agreement isn't valuable to him. It's only valuable to me. He'll know what it is. Then I go to Ridgecrest, I speak to the landlord directly, and I get a second copy made. If the original was stolen, that's a matter for the sheriff. Ethan almost said something about the sheriff. He stopped himself. That was a longer conversation. You're not afraid, he said instead. She looked up at him. I'm plenty afraid, she said. I just don't have the luxury of letting it stop me. That's not the same thing. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he picked up his fork. I'll ride into town tomorrow, he said. Ask around about your wagon. See what I can find out about Crawford's movements. I'll go with you. You should rest another day? I've rested enough. You hit your head on a mountainside 2 days ago, and today I mended your east fence. I think I've established I'm functional. She met his eyes with that direct, undecorated look that he was starting to realize was simply the way she looked at things. I go with you, Mr. Cole. It's my wagon, my shop, my life. I'm not going to sit here while someone else handles it. A long moment. Ethan nodded. Sunrise, he said. We leave at sunrise. He didn't sleep much that night. He lay in the dark and listened to the mountain sounds wind off the upper ridge. A coyote somewhere to the east, the creak of the ranch settling in the cooler night air, and he tried to locate the feeling that had taken up residence somewhere in his chest over the last 2 days. It wasn't comfortable. That much he was sure of. It was the feeling of a door that had been shut and latched and braced from the inside for 7 years, and someone had just knocked on it without knowing it was there. He thought about Margaret. He always thought about Margaret when something shifted in him. Like a check he ran. Is this right? Is this betrayal? What does this mean? And he always came to the same answer. Missing her didn't go away. It just changed shape sometimes. He thought about what Charlotte had said at the table. I'm plenty afraid. I just don't have the luxury of letting it stop me. He stared at the ceiling. You'd like her, he said to no one. To the dark. To the memory that lived in the corner of that room with him no matter how many years passed. He didn't say anything else. But for the first time in a long time, the silence felt less like something pressing down on him and more like something just present. Quiet. Not so empty. He closed his eyes. And for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, he slept until morning. At the ridge before the road descended into town, Ethan stopped his horse and looked down at Ridgecrest spread out in the valley below. Charlotte pulled up beside him on the spare horse he'd saddled for her. How bad is it? She asked. Depends on the day, Ethan said. And today. He looked at the town, at the main street and the storefronts and the glint of sun off the feed store window and the courthouse at the far end that was smaller than it should have been for all the business it needed to handle. Crawford will know you're here before we reach the livery stable, he said. He's got people watching the road. Good, Charlotte said. Her voice was flat and steady and completely without hesitation. Let him watch. Let him see that I'm not running. Ethan looked at her. She was looking at the town, shoulders back, jaw set. That same burning thing in her eyes that he'd seen when she was lying in the dirt on his mountain and had used the last of her coherent energy to say please. He had thought then that it was desperation. He was beginning to understand it was something else entirely. "Then let's go," he said. He urged Cutter down the ridge. Charlotte rode beside him. And Ethan Cole, for the first time in 7 years, did not ride into town alone. Ridgecrest was not a friendly town. Ethan had known that for years. He'd watched it change slowly, the way a river changes course, not all at once, but inch by inch, until one day you look up, and the water is somewhere completely different from where it used to be. Crawford had been the current doing the changing. Quietly at first. Then not quietly at all. The main street felt different the moment they rode in. Not loud different. Quiet different. The kind of quiet that happens when people see something coming and decide to find somewhere else to be. A man sweeping his front step stopped sweeping. 2 women talking outside the dry goods store moved inside. A boy chasing a dog across the road grabbed the dog and went the other way. Ethan felt it. He always felt it when he came to town, but today it had an edge to it that was sharper than usual. Charlotte felt it too. He could tell by the way she straightened in the saddle, not stiffening with fear, but gathering herself, pulling everything in close and deciding how to carry it. "They know something," she said quietly. "Word travels fast when Crawford wants it to," Ethan said. They tied the horses in front of the land office. Ethan scanned the street without making it obvious he was scanning. Old habit. The kind you develop when you spend enough years on a mountain and in a valley where not everyone means you well. He saw 2 men he recognized leaning against the post outside the saloon. Not drinking. Not talking. Just standing there, with their thumbs in their belts and their eyes on the street. Crawford's men. "Don't look at them," he said to Charlotte. "I wasn't going to," she said. She was already moving toward the land office door. The man inside was named Holt. Arthur Holt. He was 60-something, paper-thin, with ink-stained fingers, and the kind of eyes that had seen enough of life to be very careful about which side of things they appeared to be on. He looked up when the door opened. He looked at Charlotte. He looked at Ethan. Something moved across his face that wasn't quite fear, but was a close relative of it. "Miss Bennett," he said. Charlotte stopped. "You know who I am." "I heard you were in the territory." He set down his pen. "I also heard about your wagon. I'm sorry about that, truly." "I need a copy of my lease," Charlotte said. "The original was in my wagon when it was taken." Holt's hands were very still on the desk. "Miss Bennett, I signed a lease agreement on the building at 42 Main Street. 6 months with option to renew. I paid the first and last month in advance. You have a record of that." "I do," he said. "But then I need a copy of that record today, Mr. Holt." The man looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Ethan. Then he looked back at his desk, and he seemed to be making a decision about something that cost him more than it should have. "There's a problem," Holt said. "What kind of problem?" "The building at 42 Main Street." He cleared his throat. "It was sold 3 days ago." The room went very quiet. Charlotte didn't move. "I have a lease on that building." The owner transferred the deed. It went to a private buyer. The lease. Holt stopped. The lease was recorded as terminated due to non-payment. Non-payment? Charlotte's voice didn't rise. It got lower, quieter, which was somehow worse. "I paid 2 months in advance. I have the receipt." "The receipt was in your wagon," Ethan said quietly. She looked at him. He watched the understanding land on her. Watched her absorb it without flinching, even though he could see what it cost her. "Crawford," she said. Holt said nothing, which was itself an answer. "Who bought the building?" Ethan asked. "I'm not at liberty." "Who bought it, Arthur?" Holt looked at the desk, looked at the wall, looked anywhere but at either of them. "Cascade Holdings," he said finally. It's a land company out of Crawford, Ethan said. I can't confirm. You don't have to. Ethan looked at Charlotte. She was looking at the spot on the desk where Holt's hands were, and there was something happening behind her eyes that he recognized. Not defeat. Something harder than that. The moment when a person realizes the situation is worse than they thought and makes the decision right there in real time, not to let that be the end of it. I'll go to the sheriff, she said. Holt's expression shifted. What? Charlotte said. Sheriff Pruitt is... Holt stopped, started again. He's a fair man. He does his job. But his jurisdiction and Crawford's interests overlap in ways that make certain complaints difficult to... He's bought, Ethan said. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Ethan put his hat back on. Come on, he said to Charlotte. She didn't move immediately. She was still looking at Holt. Is there anything you can do? She asked him. Not angry, not desperate. Just asking clearly, directly, giving him the chance to be something other than what he'd been so far. Holt was quiet for a long time. There might be someone you should speak to, he said. A lawyer named Daniel Greaves. He has an office above the printer's shop on 2nd Street. Holt dropped his voice, though there was no one else in the room. He's not in Crawford's pocket, not yet. He's been representing a few of the smaller landowners. He might be able to advise you. Charlotte held his gaze. Thank you, Mr. Holt. She walked out. Ethan followed. On the boardwalk outside, she stopped and stood for a moment with her back to the street. He watched her take one breath. Just one. Long and deliberate and controlled. Then she turned around. 2nd Street, she said. Let's go. Ethan walked beside her. He was aware of Crawford's men watching from the saloon. Aware of the eyes from behind the windows. Aware of the particular pressure of a town, waiting to see how something played out. He was also aware, more than he had been about anything in a very long time, of the woman walking next to him, who had lost her wagon, her supplies, her lease, and her lease receipt in the span of 48 hours, and was walking toward a lawyer's office like the fight had just started. Because in her mind it had. The lawyer's office above the printer's shop smelled like paper and tobacco, and the kind of sustained concentration that left residue on every surface. Daniel Greaves was younger than Ethan expected, maybe 35, with a careful, intelligent face, and hands that moved precisely when he talked, like someone who had learned early that careless gestures in his profession cost people things they couldn't get back. He listened to Charlotte without interrupting. She laid it all out clearly. The lease, the advance payment, the stolen wagon, the land office conversation, the sold building, all of it in a straight, unflinching line from beginning to end. When she finished, Greaves was quiet for a moment. You said you remember the terms of the lease, he said. I remember every word of it. And the landlord's name, Marcus Webb. He was an older man, slight gray mustache. He was selling because he was moving east to be near his daughter. That was why the rent was reasonable. He wanted the transaction finished quickly and cleanly. Webb, Greaves said. He wrote something. I know that name. He left town about 2 months ago. He looked up. Did he give you any contact information? A forwarding address? A post address in Ohio. It was also in the wagon. Charlotte paused. I have it memorized. I memorized everything I put in that wagon. Greaves looked at her steadily. You memorized a postal address. I memorized everything in the wagon, she said again. Because it was everything I had. You remember things that matter to you. Greaves glanced at Ethan briefly. Ethan said nothing. The lawyer turned back to his notes. If Webb's contact information can be verified, and he can confirm the original lease terms, that establishes your case against the fraudulent termination. The sale to Cascade Holdings Crawford's company can potentially be challenged on the grounds that they purchased, knowing a valid lease existed. Can that actually be proved? Charlotte asked. Proving Crawford knew about the lease when he bought the building requires establishing that Holt informed him. Holt's cooperation would be helpful. His silence would be a problem. Greaves set down his pen. Miss Bennett, I have to be honest with you. Crawford has been operating this way for 2 years in this county. He finds properties he wants. He finds ways to manufacture reasons that existing claims are invalid, and he buys. Most people don't fight because fighting costs time and money they don't have. I don't have much of either, Charlotte said. But I have the truth, and I have a witness to every conversation I've had since I arrived here. She glanced at Ethan. If that counts for anything. Greaves looked at Ethan again, this time with more consideration. Ethan Cole, you're the one who found her on the ridge? Yes. And you'd be willing to testify to the condition she was in when you found her, the missing wagon, the circumstances. If it comes to that, it may come to that. Greaves picked up his pen again. I'll write to Webb today. If he responds and confirms the lease if he's willing to provide a sworn statement, we may have a legitimate case to bring before the circuit judge. Crawford knows to keep his hands off anything that reaches federal jurisdiction. It's the one level of law he hasn't managed to own yet. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier than the situation probably warranted. How long will it take, she asked, to hear back from Webb? 2 weeks to 3 weeks by post, depending on— I don't have 2 weeks, she said. If Crawford controls the building, he'll change the locks and establish occupancy. After enough time passes, even a valid lease becomes harder to enforce. Greaves didn't argue with that because it was true. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting I go to the building today. My lease is still valid. Until it's been properly challenged in a court of law, I have legal claim to that space. I intend to exercise it. Silence. Ethan looked at her. He could feel Greaves looking at him too, and he understood what the look meant. Is she serious? Is she going to do this? Crawford's men will be watching, Greaves said carefully. I know, Charlotte said. He won't leave a woman in that building without interference. I know that too. Then you understand what you're walking into. Mr. Greaves, Charlotte said, with a patience in her voice that was both absolute and completely done with being redirected. I walked into a mountain wilderness alone with a loaded wagon because I decided I was going to build something real here. I was robbed. I was left to die on a ridge. I survived. And now, a man who has never once spoken to me has taken everything I came here to start, and I am supposed to be afraid to walk into a building that I legally rented and open the door. She looked at him straight. Do I look afraid to you? Greaves was quiet. No, he said. You don't. Then write your letter to Webb. I'll go establish my occupancy. We'll see what Crawford does about it. She stood up. Ethan stood with her. Miss Bennett, Greaves said as they moved toward the door. If Crawford moves against you formally, legally, or otherwise, come back here immediately. I will, she said. They walked out. On the stairs going down, Ethan said, You understand that walking into that building today is going to make him move faster. I know, Charlotte said. He'll send someone before sundown. Probably. And you're still going. She stopped on the bottom step and looked at him. Direct. Clear. Without apology. Ethan, she said. It was the first time she'd used his given name. He felt it land somewhere he wasn't expecting. I came 600 miles. I have nothing left but that building and my own 2 hands. If I back down now, I never start. And if I never start, then the last 7 months of planning and saving and packing and riding meant nothing. So yes, I'm still going. He held her gaze. All right, he said. They walked to 42 Main Street together. The building was narrow, sandwiched between a feed supply on one side and an empty lot on the other. The windows were dark. There was a new padlock on the front door, copper bright, newly installed, conspicuously out of place against the weathered wood. Charlotte stood in front of it and looked at the padlock. Then she looked at Ethan. Can you get it open without breaking the door? She asked. He looked at the lock, looked at the frame, reached into the inside pocket of his vest, and took out a short piece of flat iron he carried for tack work. He had the lock open in under a minute. He stepped back. Charlotte opened the door and walked in. The space was empty. Swept clean recently from the look of it. Nothing left of whatever had been there before. Just bare floors and bare walls, and the particular silence of a space that was waiting. She stood in the middle of it and turned slowly, looking at every wall, every corner, every beam. He watched her face. He watched something move across it that he didn't have a simple word for. Not happiness, not quite. Something that happened before happiness. Recognition. The feeling of finding a place you haven't been to yet, but somehow already know. "It's exactly what I imagined," she said quietly. He said nothing. "The light from this window in the morning will be perfect for the baking counter." She moved to the back wall. "I'll put the oven here, display cases along the front. This corner is where I'll set the handwork table." She turned back to him. "Can you see it?" He looked at the empty room. "Somewhat," he said. She laughed. It was a small sound, more breath than sound, but it was real. It hit the empty room and bounced off the bare walls, and for just a moment, the space sounded like something other than nothing. Ethan looked away. "They'll come by this evening," he said. "Crawford's men." "I know." "You can't stay here alone." "I wasn't planning to ask you to stay with me," she said. "That would be too much to ask." He looked at her. "I wasn't offering to leave," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "All right," she said. He nodded, pulled the door partially closed behind them. The afternoon light came through the gap in the front window and laid itself across the floor in a long stripe. They waited. It didn't take until evening. 2 hours after they settled in Charlotte, sorting through what little she still carried in her saddlebag. Ethan positioned near the door, without making it obvious. He was positioned near the door. The sound of boots on the boardwalk outside was distinctive enough that Ethan stood up before the knock came. 3 hard knocks. Not polite ones. He opened the door. The man outside was wide, dark-suited, with a face that looked like it had been involved in a number of conversations that ended without words. He had 2 men behind him, which was either for emphasis or because he was the kind of man who needed emphasis. "Building's closed," the man said. "Door was open," Ethan said. "Padlock was on it." "Not anymore." The man's jaw shifted. He looked past Ethan at Charlotte, who had stood up and was looking back at him with exactly the same expression she'd given the land office and the lawyer and every other obstacle she'd walked through in the last 6 hours. "Ma'am, this property belongs to Cascade Holdings as of 3 days ago. You'll need to clear out." "My lease on this property is valid and in effect," Charlotte said. "The sale to Cascade Holdings was made in violation of that lease and is therefore subject to legal challenge. If Mr. Crawford has concerns, he can take them before the circuit judge." A pause. The man looked at Ethan. "Cole, you want to step out of this?" "No," Ethan said. "Crawford won't like it." "I expect not." The man was quiet for a moment. He had the look of someone recalculating, not retreating, but trying to decide what tool he wanted to use next, and whether the ones he'd brought were the right ones for the current situation. "Crawford wants a meeting," he said finally. Charlotte stepped forward until she was beside Ethan at the door. "Where and when?" "Tonight, the hotel dining room, 8 o'clock. She looked at Ethan. He said nothing. Let her read the situation. "We'll be there," she said. The man looked at Ethan one more time. A long look, the kind that was carrying a message without committing it to words. Then he turned and walked back down the boardwalk with his 2 companions. Charlotte let out a breath beside him. "Well," she said. "That's Crawford's way of doing things," Ethan said. "Public place. He looks reasonable. He makes an offer. The offer is always designed to make refusing look like your problem." "What does he usually offer?" "Money, below market, framed as a favor." "And if someone refuses?" He looked at her. "Then it stops being a meeting and starts being something else." She nodded slowly. "What was the something else for the people who came before me?" He thought about the Hendersons, who'd been run off their property 18 months ago, when their water rights were disputed by a Crawford subsidiary. About the widow Marsh, whose grain contract had been interfered with until she couldn't service her loans. About the two young brothers who'd tried to open a competing freight operation and had their wagons sabotaged 3 times before they gave up. "Nothing violent," he said. "Crawford's smarter than that. He keeps his hands clean. But people run out of options, out of money, out of time. And then he buys them out for less than they're worth and the problem goes away." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "He hasn't run into someone who won't run out of options," she said. Ethan looked at her. He thought again about 7 years, about walls, about the morning on the ridge and the boot in the rocks, and the voice saying, "Please, I don't want to die out here alone." He thought about the fact that he was standing in an empty building on Main Street in Ridgecrest at 4 in the afternoon, which he had not done in years, and he was going to stand in a hotel dining room at 8 o'clock in the evening, which he had definitely not done in years, and he had not once seriously considered any other option. He wasn't sure what to do with that. "No," he said. "He hasn't." She smiled at him. It was the first full smile she'd directed at him since he found her on the mountain, and it changed her face the way sunlight changes a room. Suddenly everything in it looked different. He looked away before it could do anything more to the thing in his chest that was already doing enough on its own. "I should go find somewhere to wash up before this meeting," she said. "Millie Dawson runs a boarding house on 3rd Street. She's decent. Tell her I sent you." "Will that help or hurt me?" "It'll help. Millie doesn't like Crawford." "Does anyone around here like Crawford?" "People who owe him money," Ethan said. "And people who are afraid they will." She nodded, started gathering her things. At the door she stopped. "Ethan?" His name again. Still doing the same thing it had done the first time. "This morning when I said I wasn't asking you to stay, I meant I wasn't going to demand it. But I'm glad you did. I want you to know that." He nodded. 8 o'clock, he said. She walked out into the late afternoon light. He stayed in the empty building a moment longer, looking at the bare walls, at the window, at the corner where she'd said she would put the handwork table. He could see it, he realized. He hadn't told her that. He should have. He put his hat on and walked out to find something to eat before the evening came, and whatever Crawford had in mind, walked through the hotel door and sat across from them. Whatever it was, Ethan was going to be there. He hadn't decided that consciously exactly. It had just stopped being a question. That in itself was something he hadn't felt in a very long time, the absence of the question. The plain, unargued certainty of a thing. He rode toward the livery stable and left the question he hadn't asked himself sitting in the empty room on Main Street next to the light from the window in the corner where the handwork table was going to be. And when 8 o'clock came, Ethan Cole walked into the Ridgecrest Hotel dining room wearing his cleanest shirt and his oldest boots and the expression he usually reserved for situations where he had already decided the outcome, and he sat down across from William Crawford for the first time in 3 years. Crawford was everything a man like him always was in rooms like this. Well-dressed, unhurried, carrying the particular ease of someone who had spent years being the most powerful person in any given conversation and had mistaken that condition for competence. He was maybe 55, silver at the temples, hands that had never done serious physical labor, eyes that were sharp in the way that shrewd people's eyes were sharp, not intelligent exactly, but very good at calculating. He looked at Ethan. He looked at Charlotte, who sat beside Ethan with her hands flat on the table and her expression professionally pleasant. "Miss Bennett," Crawford said, "I'm glad you could join me. And Mr. Cole." A pause. "I confess I was a little surprised to hear you'd involved yourself." "I found her on my mountain," Ethan said. "That makes her my business." "Indeed." Crawford looked at Charlotte. "I've heard about your situation. Terrible thing what happened on the road. Lawlessness in the territory is a genuine problem. I hope you'll recover your property in time." "I expect to," Charlotte said. "Good." Crawford settled back slightly. "I want to be direct with you, Miss Bennett. I understand you have some interest in the property at 42 Main Street. I have a lease on it. You have what you believe to be a lease." He said it pleasantly, the way you might correct a child who'd made a reasonable but incorrect assumption. The records at the land office show a different picture, but he held up one hand. I'm not interested in a legal disagreement. Legal disagreements are expensive and slow and bad for everyone involved. What I'd like to propose is simpler. Charlotte said nothing. She waited. I'll give you $500, Crawford said. That covers whatever investment you made in your plans for the building, likely with something left over. You take the money, you move on to the next opportunity, and this whole unfortunate situation is resolved cleanly. No courts, no disputes. Fresh start. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. What I invested in coming here, she said, wasn't only money. I understand that, which is why 500 is a generous. You stole my wagon, she said. Still pleasant, still completely composed. You manufactured a fraudulent lease termination. You bought a building you had no legal right to buy while my valid lease was still in effect. And now you're offering me $500 to make it all go away. Crawford's expression didn't change. I've done nothing of the kind, and suggesting otherwise. I've written to Marcus Webb, Charlotte said, the man who held that building before Cascade Holdings. She let that sit for just a second. He'll confirm the terms of our agreement. When he does, I'll have grounds to challenge the sale and the termination both, in front of the circuit judge. A very small thing happened in Crawford's eyes. Something that wasn't quite concern, but was related to it. Webb has left the territory. He has a forwarding address in Ohio. Mr. Greaves has already posted the letter. Charlotte tilted her head slightly. You didn't know I'd spoken to Greaves, did you? Your men reported where I went, but didn't catch the detail of the upstairs office. Silence. It was the silence of a man recalculating. Ethan recognized it. He'd sat across from Crawford once before, years ago, over a water rights dispute that had been resolved barely in Ethan's favor, and he knew the particular quality of Crawford's silences. They weren't empty. They were working. I'd encourage you to reconsider the offer, Crawford said quietly now. The pleasantness thinned out just at the edges. I'd encourage you to reconsider your position, Charlotte said. Crawford looked at Ethan. You're really going to let her do this? She doesn't need me to let her do anything, Ethan said. She makes her own decisions. A pause. This territory can be an unforgiving place, Crawford said. Not a threat exactly, not explicitly. Particularly for people who don't have established roots. Ethan leaned forward slightly in his chair. She's got roots, he said. She's got a valid lease, a lawyer, and a witness to every piece of dishonesty you've put in front of her in the last 12 hours. And she's got me. He held Crawford's gaze without blinking. And I've got roots so deep in this mountain that you've been trying to work around them for 3 years and haven't managed it yet. Crawford looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and placed his hat on his head, with the careful precision of a man deciding how to carry a loss without looking like he was carrying one. Enjoy your dinner, he said. He walked out of the dining room. Charlotte let out a long, slow breath. Ethan picked up his water glass. He's not done, he said. I know, she said. That was him taking stock. He'll come at this differently now. I know that too. She looked at him. But he walked out. For tonight, he walked out. Ethan looked at the door Crawford had gone through. For tonight, he agreed. She reached across the table and put her hand briefly over his, just for a second, just long enough to be felt, and then pulled it back and straightened and looked at the menu on the table like she hadn't just done that. Ethan looked at his hand. He kept his expression exactly where it was. But the thing in his chest moved again, and this time it moved like something that had been still for a very long time, finally deciding cautiously and against its better judgment to start. Crawford's next move came faster than Ethan expected. He had figured on a day, maybe 2. Crawford was the kind of man who liked to let pressure build before he applied more. Let people sit with uncertainty. Let them wonder. Let the waiting do half his work for him. But the next morning, before Charlotte had even gotten back from Millie Dawson's boarding house, Ethan found a notice nailed to the front door of 42 Main Street. He read it once. Then he took it down and read it again. It was a legal notice of trespass, issued under Crawford's company name, signed by Sheriff Pruitt, dated that morning, which meant someone had been up before dawn making sure the paperwork was in order. Ethan folded it and put it in his vest pocket. He was still standing on the boardwalk when Charlotte came around the corner with 2 cups of coffee from the cookhouse down the street, walking like a woman who had slept well and woken up ready, which he suspected was exactly what had happened, because that was the kind of person she was. She looked at his face. "What happened?" she said. He handed her the notice. She read it. He watched her read it the same way he'd read it, once fast, once slow. He watched her jaw tighten on the second pass. "Trespass," she said. "Crawford moved the moment the land office opened. Pruitt signed this. Pruitt signs what Crawford brings him." She handed the notice back. "We need Greaves." He'll already know. News moves fast in a town this size. They were at Greaves's office in 4 minutes. He was already at his desk, and he had a copy of the same notice in front of him, which confirmed that Crawford had filed broadly and publicly and wanted everyone in town to see it. "Sit down," Greaves said. They sat. "This is faster than I expected," Greaves said. "He's nervous. The mention of the circuit judge rattled him last night more than he showed." He looked at Charlotte. "That's actually useful information. It tells us he has something to protect. It also tells us he's not going to wait for us to build a case," Charlotte said. "What does the notice mean practically? Can he have me removed from the building? Pruitt can attempt to enforce it, but a trespass notice against a leaseholder is legally fragile. If your lease is valid, trespassing charges won't hold in front of any real court." Greaves leaned forward. "The problem is that Pruitt doesn't need the charge to hold permanently. He only needs it to hold long enough." "Long enough for what?" Ethan said. "Long enough for Crawford to establish occupancy. If Cascade Holdings moves workers or equipment into that building while the trespass notice keeps Charlotte out, then we're not fighting a lease dispute anymore. We're fighting an eviction of an active tenant, which is a much harder case to make." Charlotte looked at Ethan. He looked back at her. "Then I need to be in that building before any equipment arrives," she said. "Charlotte," Greaves started, "the notice is legally fragile. You just said that. If Pruitt tries to remove me and I can test it on grounds of my valid lease, the charge won't hold. Not permanently. But Pruitt can still detain you while he investigates. Crawford only needs a few hours. Then I need to make sure nothing gets moved in." She stood up. "What about Webb? Is there any faster way to reach him than post?" Greaves hesitated. "There's a telegraph line at the railway station in Miller's Crossing. That's 40 miles east. If Webb is in a town with a telegraph office..." "Send someone," Charlotte said. "Today. I'll pay for it." "I can send my clerk," Greaves said. "But 40 miles is..." "Half a day's hard ride," Ethan said. "My horse can do it. I can do it." Charlotte looked at him. "That means you're not here." "That means Webb's answer comes back in hours instead of weeks," he said. She was quiet for a moment. He could see her working through it, the value of the telegraph against the risk of being in town without him. He could also see her reaching the same conclusion he had. "Go," she said. "Don't open that building alone," he said. "Wait for me. Give me until sundown." "And if Crawford moves before sundown?" "Get Greaves and go to Pruitt together. Make it public. Make it a scene if you have to. Crawford hates scenes." She held his gaze. "How do you know so much about how Crawford operates?" "Because 3 years ago he tried to take my water rights," Ethan said, "and I've been watching him ever since." He left Greaves's office and rode east at a pace that Cutter didn't love, but accepted because he was a good horse and he knew when something was urgent. The ride to Miller's Crossing took 4 hours. He sent the telegraph message himself, simple and direct the way Greaves had written it out, confirming the terms of the lease. Requesting Webb's sworn statement be telegraphed back immediately, explaining that the matter was under legal dispute and time was critical. Then he waited. He ate a plate of something the station cook put in front of him without looking at what it was. He walked Cutter along the water trough. He sat on a bench outside the telegraph office and watched the afternoon light move across the buildings, and thought about Charlotte in Ridgecrest without him, and told himself she was more capable of handling things than most men he knew, which was true, but didn't entirely stop the thing sitting low in his gut. The response came in an hour and 40 minutes. Marcus Webb was in Columbus, Ohio, which had a telegraph office, and a man named Webb, who was apparently both honest and angry when he learned what had been done to the lease he'd written and the young woman he'd written it with. The message was 200 words long and covered every detail of the lease agreement. The advance payment, the date of signing, enclosed with the statement that he would provide a full sworn affidavit by return telegraph if that was what was required. Ethan took the telegraph paper, folded it carefully, and put it in the same vest pocket as the trespass notice. He rode back faster than he'd ridden out. He was back in Ridgecrest 2 hours before sundown. He knew immediately that something had changed. The quality of the street told him. People moving differently. Clusters of 2 and 3 gathered at the edges, the way people gathered when something was happening that they couldn't quite decide whether to watch or avoid. He pushed Cutter to the livery and moved on foot to Main Street. He heard it before he got there, Charlotte's voice carrying clearly and without any attempt at restraint from somewhere near 42 Main Street. He turned the corner. Pruitt was there. A big man, square-built, with a silver star on his coat, and the expression of someone executing an instruction he did not especially enjoy, but had decided to follow through on anyway. He had 2 deputies with him. And Charlotte was in front of the closed door of the building, not blocking it exactly, but not moving away from it either. A small crowd had gathered. Not large, maybe 15 people. The kind of watching that happened in small towns when something public went wrong. Millie Dawson was there. Holt from the land office stood at the back, not watching exactly, but not leaving either. "Miss Bennett," Pruitt was saying, in the careful tone of a man trying to do something unpleasant as cleanly as possible. "I understand your position, but this notice, that notice is based on a fraudulent termination of a valid lease," Charlotte said. Her voice was controlled, but it was carrying, and she was making sure it carried. "I have a lease on this property signed by Marcus Webb, paid in advance, and my occupancy rights are protected under territorial property law. Sheriff arresting me under this notice would be an unlawful detention. Ma'am, the deed of record. The deed of record was filed illegally while my lease was in force. You know that. Mr. Holt knows that." She looked directly at Holt, who looked at the ground. "This entire town knows that William Crawford bought this building, knowing full well it had an active tenant because he manufactured the paperwork that said otherwise." "Charlotte." Ethan's voice. She looked up. Something moved in her face when she saw him, quick, controlled, but real. Relief, yes, but underneath it something steadier than that. Like a person who had been holding a line by themselves and just heard someone else take a position beside them. He crossed the street, reached her, turned to Pruitt. "Webb replied," Ethan said. He took the telegraph paper from his vest pocket and held it out. "Marcus Webb, previous owner. He confirms every term of the lease by telegraph with a sworn affidavit to follow. Signed this afternoon in Columbus, Ohio." He held Pruitt's gaze. "That paper in your hand from Crawford doesn't hold against that." Pruitt looked at the telegraph. He was quiet. Ethan watched him work through what he was holding, what this meant for the trespass notice, what it meant for him personally if this went in front of the circuit judge with his name on a document that had just been definitively contradicted. "Sheriff," Ethan said quietly, not unkindly. "Don't do this." Pruitt looked at the crowd. He looked at Holt. He looked at Charlotte. He looked at the telegraph paper in Ethan's hand. Then he looked at his deputies. "Stand down," he said. One of the deputies blinked. "Sheriff, you heard me." Pruitt folded the trespass notice. He didn't give it back. He just put it in his own pocket. "We'll let this matter proceed through proper legal channels." He looked at Charlotte. "Ma'am, I'd suggest you contact the land office and have your documentation formally registered." "I'll do that first thing tomorrow morning," Charlotte said. Pruitt nodded. He looked at Ethan, a long look, the kind that was carrying 2 or 3 things at once, then walked away with his deputies. The crowd didn't disperse immediately. People stood there the way people stand after something they didn't expect happens in front of them, processing it. Millie Dawson stepped forward from the edge of the gathering. She was a stout, sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, who Ethan had known since she was still running a boarding house by reputation alone and building it into something real by sheer force of will. "Well," Millie said. She looked at Charlotte with an expression that was equal parts assessment and approval. "You've got spine, Miss Bennett. I'll give you that." "Thank you," Charlotte said. "You'll need more than spine if Crawford decides to stop being polite about it." "I'm aware," Charlotte said. "But he's been polite this long because he thought I'd go away. I'm not going away." Millie studied her for another moment. Then she looked at Ethan. "You vouching for her, Cole?" "I'm standing beside her," Ethan said. "She doesn't need my vouching." Something shifted in Millie's face, a fraction, a recalibration of something. "No," she said. "I suppose she doesn't." She looked back at Charlotte. "I've got a back storeroom at the boarding house that hasn't been used in 2 months. You can use it to bake in until your shop is in order. Equipment's there. I won't charge you for it." Charlotte looked at her. "Why?" Millie's expression didn't change. "Because Crawford bought out the man who used to supply my boarding house with firewood and then doubled the price on me, and I've been waiting for someone to push back at him with something that might actually stick." She nodded toward the building. "You might be it." She turned and walked back toward the boarding house without waiting for a response. Charlotte looked at Ethan. "Did that just happen?" she said. "Millie doesn't say things she doesn't mean," he said. She looked at the building, at the door. Then she turned to the remaining people, still lingering on the edge of the boardwalk, most of them watching her with the careful attention of people who had not yet decided whether this was something they were part of. "I'm opening a bakery here," she said, to all of them, to nobody in particular. Clear, unhurried matter of fact. Fresh bread and pastries Tuesday through Saturday. Preserves and handwork year-round. Anyone who wants to do business honestly is welcome. She looked at the building one more time. "Crawford doesn't own this street. Not yet." She walked inside. Ethan stood on the boardwalk for a moment. People were looking at him. He was used to people looking at him in ways that asked him to do something to take a position to indicate where he stood. He put his hat on and went inside after her. The building was dim with evening light coming sideways through the front window. Charlotte was standing in the middle of the empty space with her arms crossed and her back to him, and her shoulders were shaking. He stopped. "Charlotte?" She turned around. Her eyes were bright. Not tears exactly, something before tears. Something that happens when the pressure of a day that has pushed and pushed finally stops pushing, and the body doesn't know immediately what to do with the quiet. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "I know," he said. "I just—" She stopped, took one breath. "I kept thinking while you were gone about what happens if this doesn't work, what I would do, where I would go, whether I had been foolish to come this far for something that might not—" She stopped again. "It's working," he said, "because you got the telegraph. Because you stood in front of that door and made it a public matter before Pruitt could move you." He kept his voice steady. "I brought the paper. You'd already done the hard part." She looked at him. "You didn't have to ride 40 miles today," she said. "No," he agreed. "Why did you—" He held her gaze. He was aware in that particular uncomfortable way that had been growing since the mountain that this was a moment where the answer he gave mattered, where the honest answer and the safe answer were not the same answer. "Because it needed doing," he said. She watched him. "Ethan," she said quietly. "Don't," he said. She tilted her head. "I wasn't going to say anything you'd find uncomfortable. You were going to say thank you." "Is that uncomfortable?" "It's unnecessary." She almost smiled. "You find gratitude uncomfortable." "I find it—" He stopped. "I'm not used to it, that's all." She was quiet for a moment. The evening light was doing something in the room that he was not going to describe to himself, even internally. "You've been alone too long," she said. Not unkindly. just as a fact. Most people would agree with that. I'm not most people. I noticed. Something happened between them in the space that followed. He felt it the way you feel. Whether before it arrives a change in pressure, a shift in the air, something that hadn't been there a moment before. Then the door opened behind him. He turned. It was Greaves moving fast without his jacket, which meant he'd come directly from his desk and hadn't stopped for anything. Crawford just filed in district court, Greaves said. His voice was tight. An injunction against the property pending resolution of the deed dispute. If the judge grants it, and Crawford has enough pull to get it granted before morning, neither of you can set foot in this building until the case is heard. Charlotte's expression went still. When would the case be heard? 3 months minimum. Crawford's lawyer will delay it to 6 if they can. 6 months, Charlotte said. He doesn't have to beat us legally. He just has to outlast us. Yes, Greaves said. Can we challenge the injunction? We can file an emergency motion. But we need more than the telegraph. We need Webb's affidavit in hand, not promised. We need physical documentation. Greaves looked at Ethan. And we need someone who can speak to the judge directly. The circuit judge is Thomas Harlan. He's due in Miller's Crossing at the end of the week for the regular session. If we can get in front of him before Crawford's injunction is formally granted. How much time? Ethan said. 48 hours, maybe less. Charlotte was looking at the floor. Ethan watched her think. He'd come to recognize the quality of that silence. It wasn't defeat. It was the before part. The part right before she decided what to do next. I need to write to Webb again, she said. Tonight. I need a sworn affidavit telegraphed directly to the court in Miller's Crossing, addressed to Judge Harlan personally. I'll draft the request, Greaves said. I'll ride out with it at first light, Ethan said. Charlotte looked at him. Again. Webb needs to know to address it to Harlan specifically. That's not something we can trust to the regular post. Ethan, you rode 40 miles today. Cutter's rested, he said. I'll manage. She held his gaze for a long moment. There was something in her eyes he didn't look away from this time. Something that asked a question without words, and that he answered the same way just by holding the look and not moving. Greaves, she said without looking away from Ethan. Draft the message. I'll have it ready in an hour, Greaves said. He left, pulling the door behind him. The room was quiet again. Charlotte looked away first. She moved to the window and stood there. Tell me something, she said. Honestly. All right. When you found me on the mountain. She kept her eyes on the window. When you were deciding whether to keep writing. What made you stop? He thought about that for a moment, not about how to answer it. About the actual truth of it, which he hadn't looked at directly until now. You said please, he said. And it sounded like something real. She was quiet. That's all, she said. That's all, he said. Then, and you looked like someone who wasn't ready to give up yet, even half-conscious, even bleeding. He stopped. I recognized that. She turned from the window. You recognized giving up, she said. I recognized not being ready to, he said. She looked at him steadily. In the fading evening light in the empty room with the trespass notice no longer on the door and the injunction being typed somewhere across town and 48 hours ticking down, she looked at him like she was seeing something she had suspected for a while and had confirmed. You're not as closed off as you think you are, she said softly. He said nothing. She walked toward the door, paused with her hand on the frame. Get some sleep before you ride, she said. Cutter may be rested. You're not. She walked out. He stood in the empty room for a full minute after she left. He was very aware of the sound of his own breathing, of the space she had just been standing in, of the fact that for the first time since he could clearly remember the inside of an empty room did not feel like a relief. He rode at first light. Greaves's message was ready when he arrived at the office at 4 a.m. Greaves had worked through the night, which said something about the man that Ethan made a note of. The message laid out the case, cited Webb's telegraph, and requested the formal affidavit be directed to the court in Miller's Crossing before the end of the week. Ethan made the ride. Webb's response came back within 3 hours. The man was clearly angry, clearly organized, and the affidavit was thorough. Ethan had the court clerk in Miller's Crossing formally receive and timestamp it, which made it a matter of official record. Then he sent a separate message to Judge Harlan's clerk directly flagging the matter as time-sensitive and pending an improperly applied injunction. Harlan's clerk responded in 2 hours. The judge would hear the matter on Thursday, 2 days away, and he was requesting the presence of all named parties and their legal representatives. Ethan read that last line twice. Then he paid the telegraph operator, folded everything carefully, and rode back to Ridgecrest. He found Charlotte in Millie Dawson's back storeroom, which had been transformed in less than a day into something that smelled powerfully of bread and warm sugar and the kind of productive heat that meant serious work had been done. There was a small line of wrapped parcels on the back table, and a cooling rack of something that looked like it hadn't been in that county before Charlotte arrived. She looked up when he came in. He held up the telegraph from Harlan's clerk. She crossed the room in 4 steps, took the paper, read it. He watched her read it, watched the moment it landed. She pressed one hand flat against the work table and closed her eyes for just a second. 1 second. Then she opened them. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday. That's 2 days." "Yes. Crawford will know by now." "Probably already filed a response with Harlan's clerk," Ethan agreed. "He's not going to take this sitting down." She set the paper on the work table carefully. What does he do now, when the legal route starts going against him? Ethan had been thinking about that on the ride back. He'd been thinking about it in the spaces between thinking about other things, which meant it had been there the whole time underneath everything else. "He gets personal," Ethan said. She looked at him. "He stops going after the property," Ethan said. "He starts going after the people connected to it. Greaves, Millie if she's publicly backing you. Anyone who's given you support, he can threaten or buy or make an example of." He paused. "And me." The room was very still. "You," she said. "I've been a thorn in Crawford's side for 3 years. My water rights dispute cost him a contract he wanted. My testimony carries weight in this county because I've been here long enough and I don't have obligations to anyone. If he can discredit me, how? He'll find something, or manufacture something. It's what he does." Ethan looked at her steadily. "I want you to know that. I want you to know that standing beside you has a cost, and I know what it is, and I'm standing here anyway." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face that was quieter and deeper than the practical, forward-moving expression he'd come to associate with her. Something that went under all of that. "Why are you telling me?" she said. "Because you should know," he said. "Because you're not the kind of person who would want someone standing beside her without understanding what they were signing up for." She held his gaze. "And you're sure you understand what you're signing up for?" He held it back. "No," he said honestly. "But I'm sure I'm not walking away from it." The back door of the storeroom opened. Millie came in carrying a supply crate, stopped when she saw the two of them, and set the crate down on the nearest surface with the casual efficiency of a woman who had walked in on private moments before and knew how to handle them. "Judge Harlan," she said, looking at the telegraph paper on the work table. "Thursday," Charlotte said. Millie nodded slowly. "Harlan's a fair man. Crawford knows it, which is why he's been careful to keep things out of the circuit court." She looked at Ethan. "He'll come at you before Thursday." "I know," Ethan said. "What are you planning to do about it?" "Same thing I've been doing," he said. "Show up." Millie looked at him, looked at Charlotte, looked at the wrapped parcels on the back table and the cooling rack and the telegraph from Judge Harlan and the altogether different character of her own back storeroom since this woman had walked into it. "Well," Millie said. She picked up her empty crate and turned back to the door. "In that case, supper's at 6, both of you." She walked out. Charlotte looked at the door she'd left through. "I think she likes you," she said. "Millie doesn't like anyone," Ethan said. "She respects things. That's different." "She respects you." She tolerates me. There's a difference. Charlotte smiled. It was small, tired around the edges, but completely real. Go rest, she said. You've ridden 80 miles in 2 days. I'll rest after supper. Ethan. He looked at her. Thank you, she said. She held up one hand before he could respond. I know you find it unnecessary. I know you're going to say it's just what needed doing. But I'm going to say it anyway because it's true, and because you deserve to hear it, and because... She stopped. Her voice had dropped quieter. Because I'm starting to think that nobody has said it to you in a very long time, and that matters to me. The room was quiet. He didn't say it was unnecessary. He didn't say anything. He put his hat on. 6 o'clock, he said. And he walked out before the thing in his chest could reach his face, which it was very close to doing. Crawford's move came that evening. Not to Ethan, not to Greaves, not to Millie or the shop or the legal case. It came in the form of a man who arrived at the boarding house at 7:30 in the evening and asked to speak to Charlotte Bennett privately, and who told her when he had her alone in the front parlor before Millie could get there that he knew something about the accident on the mountain road. He said he had seen the men who took the wagon. He said he could give her name's testimony everything she needed. He said all she had to do was meet him at the South Crossroads at 9 o'clock that night, and he would tell her everything. And he said quietly, carefully, that if she brought Ethan Cole or anyone else along, the offer went away forever. Charlotte looked at the man for a long moment. Then she went and found Ethan. She told him everything exactly as it had been said without leaving out any detail. He listened without moving. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. You were never going to go alone, he said. No, she said. Then what do you want to do? She looked at him. I want to go. With you. And I want to see who Crawford sent to that crossroads and what they were actually planning to do when a woman showed up there alone at 9 o'clock at night. Ethan looked at her. That's dangerous, he said. I know. It could be physical, not just talk. I know that too. And you still want to go. She met his eyes straight. I want to know how far he's willing to go, Ethan. Because if we go into that courtroom Thursday without knowing what he's capable of, we're walking in blind. And I don't walk anywhere blind if I have a choice. He held her gaze. Then he stood up, took his hat off the hook by the door, and held it for a second before he put it on. We leave at 8:30. He said, and we don't go to the crossroads. We go to the ridge above it. She stood. I'll get my coat, she said. The ridge above the South Crossroads was dark and cold in a way that summer nights in the mountains always were. The heat of the day gone fast once the sun dropped. The kind of cold that reminded you the mountain didn't care what season it was supposed to be. Ethan had his hand on Cutter's neck to keep him quiet. Charlotte was beside him on the spare horse, and she hadn't made a sound since they'd taken position above the road. He'd noticed that about her over the last few days, she didn't fill silence with noise. She understood when quiet was a tool. Below them, the crossroads was empty, for now. How long do we wait? She whispered. Until we see what shows up, he said. They didn't wait long. 3 men came from the South Road. Not 1. 3. The man who had visited Charlotte at the boarding house was in the middle, walking between 2 others who were bigger and moved the way men moved when they were there for a physical purpose and were comfortable with that purpose. They were not carrying lanterns. That told Ethan everything he needed to know about what kind of meeting this was supposed to be. He felt Charlotte go still beside him. 3? She said. Yes. He was never going to give me testimony. No, Ethan said. She was quiet for a moment. Below them, the 3 men settled in at the crossroads, scanning the road from the north, looking for the woman who was supposed to arrive alone. What would they have done? She said. Her voice was controlled, but he could hear what was underneath it. Not fear exactly, but the particular feeling of understanding that a threat you'd suspected was real has just been confirmed in a way you can't argue with anymore. Scared you off, best case, Ethan said. Worst case, roughed you up enough to make you think twice about Thursday. Crawford sanctioned that. Crawford doesn't sanction things with his signature. He just makes the environment where they happen. She was quiet. Below them, one of the men kicked at the dirt and said something to the others that didn't carry up the ridge. They were getting impatient. "We need to go back," Ethan said. "Not yet." "Charlotte." "I want to know who they are." She was watching them steadily. "The man from the boarding house. Do you recognize the other two?" He looked. Took his time. "The tall one on the left works Crawford's South Ranch," he said. "Name's Reeves. The other one I've seen around the saloon, but I don't know his name." "Reeves?" she said quietly. "That's enough." She turned her horse. He followed her back down the ridge the long way around the road, avoiding the crossroads entirely. Neither of them spoke until they were back in town, back at the boarding house with the horses in the stable and the quiet of Millie's front hall around them. Millie was still awake. She looked at their faces when they came in and didn't ask where they'd been. "Sit down," she said. "There's coffee." They sat. Ethan told Millie what they'd seen. 3 men. Reeves from the South Ranch. The crossroads at 9 o'clock. Millie listened without expression. "Reeves," she said when he finished. "That's Crawford going further than he usually goes." "He's rattled," Ethan said. "The hearing Thursday rattled him." "Rattled men are dangerous men," Millie said. "I know." Charlotte was holding her coffee mug in both hands. She'd been quiet since the ridge. Ethan had been watching her in his peripheral vision, not obtrusively, just enough to know she was working through something. "Greaves needs to know," she said. "First thing tomorrow," Ethan said. "Tonight," she said. "If Crawford is willing to send 3 men to a crossroads to rough up a woman, he's not going to wait for Thursday. He's going to move again before that. And we need Greaves to have the full picture before he does." Ethan looked at the clock on Millie's mantel. It was 20 past 9. "Greaves is a lawyer," he said. "He works early, not late." "He'll want to know this tonight," Charlotte said. "Trust me." He looked at her. He did trust her. That was the thing. Somewhere in the last 3 days, it had stopped being a conscious decision and started being just the way things were. "I'll go," he said. He was back in 20 minutes with Greaves, who had indeed been awake, working from the look of his ink-stained hands, and who sat at Millie's kitchen table and listened to the full account with the focused stillness of a man filing everything he heard immediately and permanently. When they finished, he set down his pen. "Reeves," he said, "if he can be compelled to testify about Crawford's instructions." "He won't," Ethan said. "He's been on Crawford's payroll for 4 years. People on payrolls talk when the alternative gets uncomfortable enough," Greaves said. He looked at Ethan. "You know him. Not well, but you know him. Is he the kind of man who does what he's told because he agrees with it, or because he doesn't see another option?" Ethan thought about that. About the few times he'd crossed paths with Reeves over the years. About the particular quality of the man's manner, not cruel, not hard, just weary in a way that meant he was carrying something that cost more than the work paid for. "The second," he said. Greaves nodded slowly. "Then there might be a conversation to have." "That's my conversation to have," Ethan said. "Not yours. If Reeves thinks it's a legal move, he'll shut down. It has to be person to person. Can you do it before Thursday?" "Tomorrow," Ethan said. "Early." Charlotte looked at him. He knew what the look was. She wanted to ask if it was safe, and she'd decided not to ask because she already knew the answer was uncertain, and she trusted him to know that too. "All right," Greaves said. He stood. "I'll spend the morning preparing for every scenario Crawford might introduce in front of Harlan. By noon, I need all 3 of us in my office to go through the hearing procedure." He looked at Charlotte. "How are you holding up?" "Fine," she said. "Honestly." She looked at him directly. "I'm tired. I'm angry. And I have exactly enough left in me to get through Thursday, after which I intend to sleep for approximately 1 week." She paused. "But I'm fine." Greaves almost smiled. "Good night, Miss Bennett." He left. Millie disappeared upstairs without ceremony, leaving the kitchen to the 2 of them. The fire was low. The clock on the mantel said 9:45. Outside, the town was quiet in the way small towns get quiet at night. Not silent, but settled. Charlotte set down her mug. "I keep thinking about what would have happened," she said. "If I'd gone alone?" "Don't," he said. "I'm not catastrophizing. I'm just—" She looked at the table. "I'm just glad I told you, that's all." "You always would have told me," he said. She looked up. "What makes you sure?" "Because you're not foolish," he said. "And walking into that alone would have been foolish. And you don't do foolish things just to prove you don't need help." She was quiet for a moment. "Most people think those are the same thing," she said. "Not needing help and not asking for it." "They're not." "No," she said. "They're not." She looked at him steadily. "How long did it take you to learn that?" He held her gaze. "I'm still learning it," he said. The honesty of that surprised him slightly. He wasn't in the habit of saying true things about himself out loud. It felt different from how he'd expected, not as exposed as he'd thought it would. More like setting something down that he'd been carrying in a way that had started to hurt. She looked at him for a long moment. "Get some sleep," she said softly. "You've got an early morning." He nodded, stood, put his hat on. At the kitchen door, he stopped. "Charlotte." She looked at him. "I'm glad you told me too," he said. He went to find somewhere to sleep. He found Reeves the next morning at Crawford's South Ranch, which was a risk, and he knew it, but showing up at a man's workplace in plain sight was sometimes safer than finding him on a road somewhere and letting him think it was an ambush. Reeves was in the corral working a young horse when Ethan arrived. He saw Ethan coming and he stopped working, but he didn't run, which was a good sign. Ethan dismounted at the fence. They looked at each other across the rails. "Cole," Reeves said. "Morning," Ethan said. A pause. The young horse moved away from both of them. "You here for me or for Crawford?" Reeves said. "For you." Reeves looked at the horse. "I don't have anything to say." "I know what happened at the crossroads last night," Ethan said. "All of it. The setup, the instructions, who gave them." Reeves was quiet. "3 men at a dark crossroads to meet a woman coming alone," Ethan said. "That sit well with you." "I didn't touch anybody." "She didn't come," Ethan said. "So you didn't have to decide whether you were going to or not. But you were there. And Crawford put you there. And now you're standing here trying to figure out whether I'm a threat or an exit." Reeves looked at him then. Something moved in the man's eyes that wasn't defiance. "What exit?" "Thursday," Ethan said. "Circuit Court. Judge Harlan is hearing the property case. You testify about your instructions, who gave them what you were there for, and you're protected. Harlan will hear it. Crawford's reach doesn't go to the circuit court." "Crawford's reach goes wherever it wants," Reeves said. "You know that. Not this time." Ethan kept his voice even. "This time there's a paper trail. Webb's affidavit, the telegraph records, the trespass notice with Pruitt's signature. Crawford has been building this case for months, and every piece of it is documented. He's already exposed. All you're deciding is whether you're standing on the exposed side or the other one when it falls." Reeves looked at the horse. A long silence. "I've got a family," Reeves said. "I know. If Crawford decides to make an example, Crawford is going to be too busy managing his own collapse to make examples of anyone," Ethan said. "But I understand the risk feels real to you. So I'll tell you this, Harlan will hear your testimony before he hears anything else. By the time Crawford knows you talked, it'll be in the court record, and there's nothing he can do about it." Reeves was quiet for a long time. The young horse moved back toward them, slowly sniffing at the fence rail. "I need to think about it," Reeves said. "You've got until tomorrow morning," Ethan said. "Come to Greaves's office on 2nd Street before 8. If you're not there, I'll take that as your answer." He remounted Cutter. "Reeves," he said. "She came 600 miles. She's not doing this for sport. She's doing it because she has a right to." He held the man's gaze. "Think about that while you're thinking about the rest of it." He rode back to town. He didn't know if Reeves would come. He told Greaves and Charlotte what had happened, both of them listening without interrupting, and then he said he didn't know. And Charlotte nodded, like that was an honest answer, which it was, and Greaves said they would proceed as if Reeves wasn't coming, and treat him as a bonus if he showed. The afternoon was preparation. Greaves walked them through the hearing procedure, what Harlan would ask, what Crawford's lawyer would likely argue, where the strongest points in their case sat, and where the soft spots were. Charlotte absorbed it all with the same focused precision she brought to everything, asking questions that made Greaves pause and think before he answered, which Ethan suspected was a quality she'd had since before she knew it was useful. At 4 p.m, there was a knock at Greaves's office door. It was Holt. Arthur Holt, from the land office, carrying a leather satchel and looking like a man who had made a decision that cost him, and had decided to pay it anyway. "I have the original lease registration record," he said. He put the satchel on Greaves's desk. "The paper Crawford had me file the fraudulent termination. I kept a copy of the original before he had me alter the record." He looked at Charlotte. "I should have given this to you 2 days ago. I'm sorry I didn't." Charlotte looked at the satchel, then at Holt. "Why now?" she asked. "Because Crawford sent men to that crossroads last night," Holt said simply. "And I've been telling myself for 2 years that he was hard, but not dangerous. That line moved last night, and I don't want to be standing on the side I'm currently standing on when this is over." He sat down without being invited. "Tell me what you need me to say in front of Harlan," he said. The room was very quiet. Greaves looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Charlotte. Charlotte looked at Holt with the particular expression she got when a thing she had hoped for but hadn't let herself count on arrived without warning. "Thank you, Mr. Holt," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Holt said. "Crawford is going to know I came here before morning." "Then we move the hearing up," Greaves said. He was already reaching for paper. "I'll petition Harlan's clerk for an emergency morning session, tomorrow at 8 before Crawford can file anything else, with Holt's original record and Webb's affidavit and Reeves if he comes." "It's enough," Charlotte said. "It's enough even without Reeves." "It's more than enough," Greaves said. He looked up and Ethan saw something in the lawyer's face that he hadn't seen there before, a quality of genuine energy, the kind that happens when a person who works in systems made of rules sees those rules about to do what they're supposed to do. "We have him, Miss Bennett." Charlotte looked at the satchel on the desk, at Holt, at Greaves. Then she looked at Ethan. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Whatever was in his face in that moment, he didn't know exactly what it was, but it was real, and she could see it, and she looked back at him with something equally real and equally unfinished in her eyes. "Tomorrow at 8, she said. "Tomorrow at 8, Greaves confirmed. That night, Crawford came to the boarding house himself. Not his men. Crawford. In person. Which meant he knew about Holt, and probably suspected Reeves, and had decided that the instrument of his usual distance wasn't working. Millie turned him away at the door. Not rudely, not with confrontation. She simply stood in the doorway with her arms folded and told him that her guests weren't receiving visitors at that hour, and that if he had business with Miss Bennett, it could be conducted through her legal representative. He stood there for a moment. She could see him calculating. Then he left. Millie came back inside and reported this to the kitchen table with the same manner she used to report that supper was ready. Charlotte looked at Ethan. "He's trying to get to me before tomorrow," she said. "He can't," Ethan said. "Not tonight. And tomorrow Harlan is in that room and Crawford's hands are tied. He might try to delay the hearing. Greaves anticipated that. He filed the emergency petition as an urgent matter of documented property fraud. Harlan doesn't like having his session agenda manipulated. Crawford trying to push back on a Greaves petition would annoy the judge more than help him. She nodded slowly. "You've thought this through." "I've had practice thinking several moves ahead," he said. "Living alone on a mountain for 7 years. You think about things." She looked at him. "What else did you think about in 7 years?" It was a quiet question, an evening question. The kind asked at the end of a long day, when the immediate pressure had backed off slightly, and the real things got a chance to surface. He was quiet for a moment. "Whether I was going to be all right," he said. "And were you?" "I thought I was." He held her gaze. I'm not sure anymore that what I had was all right. I think it was just manageable, which isn't the same thing." She looked at him with those dark, direct eyes. "What changed?" she said softly. "I found someone on my mountain," he said. The kitchen was quiet. Millie had gone upstairs. The clock ticked. The fire burned low. Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. He watched her reach towards something and then stop herself, and he understood it because he was doing the same thing on his side of the table, reaching and stopping. Not because it wasn't real, but because the next day was real too, and the hearing was real, and none of it was finished yet, and he needed all of himself tomorrow morning. "We should sleep," she said. "Yes," he said. She stood. So did he. They were 3 feet apart in Millie's kitchen, and everything that hadn't been said between them was sitting right there in that 3 feet, taking up more space than either of them. "Ethan," she said. "I know," he said. She looked at him. "After tomorrow," she said. "After tomorrow." He agreed. She went upstairs. He sat back down at the table and stared at the low fire for a while, and tried to organize his thoughts into something useful for the morning. They kept coming back to her, to the 3 feet that had been between them, to the after tomorrow that she'd said like a promise. He was up before 4. He was at Greaves's office at 7:30 when Reeves arrived. He came alone on foot, looking like a man who had not slept, and had made a decision that had cost him the sleep deliberately, which meant he'd been sitting with it all night and had gotten to the same place either way, and decided to stop sitting and do the thing. "I'm here," Reeves said. "I see that," Ethan said. Greaves was inside. Charlotte was already there. Holt had arrived 20 minutes earlier. The 4 of them sat with Reeves for 30 minutes while Greaves took his account clean specific exactly what Crawford had instructed, and in whose words and when. Reeves delivered it with the flat, precise manner of someone who had decided that if he was going to do this, he was going to do it completely and without hedging. At 8 o'clock exactly, they walked into the Miller's Crossing courthouse. Crawford was already there with his lawyer, a man named Fitch, who was expensive in the way that expensive lawyers in this territory tended to be skilled at the paperwork of plausible deniability. Crawford looked at Ethan when they entered, then at Charlotte, then at Holt. A slight change happened in Crawford's posture, something that wasn't visible unless you knew what you were looking at. Ethan knew what he was looking at. Crawford had already lost, and he knew it. He just hadn't accepted the shape of that loss yet. Judge Thomas Harlan was 70 and efficient. He had the manner of a man who had sat in rooms like this for 40 years and had no patience for waste. He read everything Greaves submitted. He heard Holt's testimony. He heard Webb's affidavit read into the record. He heard Reeves, Crawford's lawyer, objected 4 times. Harlan overruled 3 and sustained 1 on a technicality that didn't affect the substance of the case. Then Harlan looked at Crawford directly. "Mr. Crawford," he said, "the documentation before this court establishes clearly that Miss Bennett held a valid lease on the property at 42 Main Street at the time of its sale to Cascade Holdings. It further establishes that the termination record filed with the Ridgecrest Land Office was altered after the fact, and that the basis for that alteration was fraudulent. The deed transfer to Cascade Holdings is therefore void." Crawford's lawyer started to say something. "I'm not finished," Harlan said with a quietness that shut the room down completely. "Furthermore, the testimony of Mr. Reeves, along with the documented sequence of events Miss Bennett has presented, establishes a pattern of deliberate interference with a lawful tenant's rights that this court takes very seriously." He looked at Crawford again. "You will have 30 days to liquidate Cascade Holdings' claim on the property at no cost to Miss Bennett. You will restore the lease record at the Ridgecrest Land Office to its original state. And I will be recommending to the Territorial Commissioner that your other property holdings in this county be reviewed for similar irregularities." He set down his papers. "Court is adjourned." He stood. Everyone stood. He walked out. The room exhaled. Charlotte stood very still beside Ethan. He could feel the stillness of her, the complete absolute stillness of someone absorbing something that they had fought very hard for and that had just arrived. Crawford left without looking at either of them. His lawyer followed. Reeves left through the side door, quickly head down. Holt looked at Charlotte. "I'm sorry," he said again, "for what it took me too long to do." "It matters that you did it," she said. "That's enough." He nodded. He shook Greaves's hand and walked out. Greaves gathered his papers. He was trying very hard not to look as satisfied as he clearly was. "Well," he said. "That was Thursday." Charlotte looked at him, then at Ethan. Then something happened in her face that he had not seen there before. Not the forward-moving precision, not the fierce composure, not the direct and undecorated gaze. Something that was underneath all of that. Something quieter and less armored. Something real in a different way than everything else he'd seen from her had been real. She put her hand over her mouth for a second. Then she laughed, short and real and completely unguarded. The kind of laugh that happens when relief and exhaustion and triumph arrive all at the same time, and the body doesn't know how to sort them, so it lets them all out at once. Greaves smiled genuinely. "I'll file the formal restoration order this afternoon. Your shop is yours, Miss Bennett." He picked up his case. "I'll leave you two to it." He walked out. They were alone in the empty courtroom. Charlotte turned to Ethan. She was looking at him with everything she had all at once, all the tiredness and the real happiness, and the thing underneath it that had been building since a mountain ridge, and a pair of dark brown eyes, and a word that sounded like something true. He looked back. "It worked," she said. "It worked," he said. She crossed the 3 feet between them, and she put her arms around him. He stilled for a second, the particular still of a person whose body has forgotten what it feels like to be held, and has to be reminded. And then his arms came up and around her, and he held her back with the careful total certainty of a man who has not held on to anything in a very long time, and is very aware of the difference between holding something and holding it like it matters. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. They stood in the empty courtroom in Miller's Crossing, with the morning light coming through the high windows, and he felt something move in his chest that was nothing like the careful, managed quiet he'd built for himself over 7 years. It felt like a door opening, not slamming open, not breaking down, just opening. Quietly. The way things open when they've been closed a long time, and someone finally turns the handle the right way. She pulled back slightly, looked up at him. "After tomorrow," she said. "Except it's after now." "It's after now," he agreed. She held his gaze. "I'm opening my shop on Tuesday," she said. "Bread and preserves. Handwork on the weekends. And I'm going to need help with the east-facing shelving because I measured wrong and I don't own a saw." He looked at her. "I have a saw," he said. "I know you do," she said. He almost smiled. Almost. The muscle still wasn't entirely sure of itself, but it was getting there. The ride back from Miller's Crossing took 2 hours, and neither of them pushed it. Ethan rode beside Charlotte the whole way, not ahead the way he usually rode when he had somewhere to be and things to think through, but beside her. Matching Cutter's pace to the spare horse without thinking about it. It wasn't a decision exactly. It was just what his body did. She talked some. About the shop. About what she needed to get in order before Tuesday, which was 4 days away. About the shelving and the oven placement and whether Millie's supplier would extend credit for the first flour and sugar order until the first week's sales came in. Practical things. Real things. The kind of talk that comes from someone who has been holding a dream together with both hands through 3 days of people trying to take it apart, and who can finally let it breathe a little. He listened. Mostly, he listened. He asked a question here and there, the kind of question that let her keep going. And he watched the way her face changed as she talked the tightness of the last 3 days, slowly releasing the forward-moving precision, softening into something more like genuine anticipation. She was happy. He hadn't seen that yet. Not fully. He'd seen her fierce and determined and exhausted and quietly emotional and carefully composed. He hadn't seen her happy. It looked different from all of those. It looked like something that belonged on her face, the way that nothing else he'd seen there had quite fit. He looked at the road. He was aware in the particular way that a man becomes aware of things he has been not looking at directly, that something had shifted between them in that courtroom. Not the embrace exactly, though that had done something to him that he was still processing in the lower, quieter regions of himself. But the after tomorrow, the way she'd said it like a door opening, the way it had felt like an answer to a question he hadn't quite let himself ask. He was also aware that he didn't know what to do with that. 7 years of not knowing what to do with things like that was a long time. The muscle for it was there. He could feel it. But it was the kind of muscle that needs careful use when it's been still too long, not the kind you test all at once. "You're quiet," Charlotte said. "I'm usually quiet," he said. "This is a different kind of quiet," she said. "You were thinking about something." He glanced at her. "You can tell the difference." "I've been watching you think for 3 days," she said. "You get a particular look when you're working something out. Your jaw changes." He didn't say anything to that. "What were you thinking about?" she asked. He considered the question seriously the way she'd asked it seriously. "Margaret," he said. She didn't react with surprise. She just waited. "Not the way I used to think about her," he said. "I used to think about her, and it was like running into a wall. Every time. The same wall." He was quiet for a moment. "This morning, it was different. I thought about her, and I thought she would have liked this. She would have liked you. She'd have said something sharp and funny about Crawford, and she'd have made Greaves laugh, and she'd have told Millie Dawson that her biscuits needed more butter." Charlotte was quiet. "What was she like?" she said. He hadn't talked about Margaret to another person in 5 years. He'd talked at her in the dark, which was different. Talking about her to someone living, to someone present, felt different in a way he didn't entirely have language for yet. "Stubborn," he said. "Smarter than she let on. She could read a person in the first 30 seconds, and she was almost never wrong, but she never made people feel judged by it." He paused. "She laughed easily. I used to think I was funnier than I am because of how often she laughed." A beat. She wasn't easy to fool, and she wasn't easy to discourage. She was going to build something real here too, different from you, but the same in the ways that matter. Charlotte was quiet for a long time. "She sounds like someone worth grieving," she said finally. "She was. And you did. For a long time." "Yes. And now." He held her gaze for a moment, both of them riding side by side with the mountain road stretching ahead and the late morning sun on everything. "Now," he said carefully, "I think I'm ready to stop living inside it." She looked at him with those eyes. The same eyes that had been the first thing he'd seen on the ridge, burning present, impossible to look away from. "That's not a small thing," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." She didn't push further. She turned her eyes back to the road. But he saw something settle in her expression. Not satisfaction, not triumph. Something quieter. Something that looked from the outside like the feeling of knowing that a thing is real and can be trusted and doesn't need to be rushed. They rode into Ridgecrest at midday. The town felt different. He noticed it before he could have explained it. The same main street, the same buildings, the same people going about the same business. But something had shifted in the quality of it. Less held in. Like a room after a window's been opened. Millie was on her front step when they rode past the boarding house. She looked at their faces and nodded once, a single economical motion that contained what another person might have expressed with a full speech. "It went well then," she said. It wasn't a question. "It went well," Charlotte said. "Good." Millie looked at Ethan. "There's a man been waiting at the land office since 9 this morning. Name of Patterson. Works for the Territorial Commissioner's office, apparently. Showed up about an hour after you two left for Miller's Crossing." Ethan looked at her. "Commissioner's office." That's what he said. Millie's expression was carefully neutral in the way she went neutral when she had information she thought was significant. Harlan must have moved faster than expected on that recommendation. Ethan dismounted. Charlotte was already on the ground. She looked at him. "The review of Crawford's other holdings," she said. "That's what it sounds like." "That was this morning. Harlan only adjourned an hour ago." "Harlan has a telegraph in his chambers," Ethan said, "and he's been wanting Crawford in front of someone with actual authority for 2 years. I suspect he sent that message before the gavel came down." Charlotte looked toward the land office, then back at Ethan. "Should we?" "Yes," he said. They went together. Patterson was a compact man in his 40s with a government manner that was professional without being unfriendly, the kind of person who had learned to deliver complicated information in simple language, because complicated information delivered badly created more work for everybody. He had a leather case full of documents and the focused energy of someone who had been sent on an assignment he considered genuinely important. He looked at Charlotte first, then at Ethan. "Miss Bennett," he said. "Mr. Cole, I've just come from reviewing Judge Harlan's referral. The Commissioner's office has been building a file on Cascade Holdings and affiliated Crawford interests for 14 months. What happened in Ridgecrest is not an isolated case. We have 8 other property disputes in this county that follow the same pattern." Charlotte was very still. "8, she said. "That we know of," Patterson said. "There may be more where the affected parties didn't have the resources or the documentation to make a formal case. What your case provides the original lease record, Webb's affidavit, Reeves's testimony. The documented sequence of events is the clearest evidence we've had to date of intentional, systematic fraud." He looked at her directly. "Miss Bennett, your case is the one that makes the others provable. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" She looked at him. "You're telling me that what happened to me wasn't personal," she said. "It was a method." "Yes. And my case breaks the method open." "Yes." She was quiet. Ethan watched her absorb that not just the victory for herself, but the larger shape of it. The way the thing she'd fought for had turned out to be bigger than the thing she'd been fighting for. He watched her take that in without shrinking from it or performing humility about it, just taking it in the way she took everything in. "What do you need from me?" she said. "A formal statement. Your full account from the beginning. The original approach, the stolen wagon, the fraudulent lease termination, the trespass notice, the crossroads meeting." Patterson opened his case. "Everything in sequence on record." "When?" "This afternoon, if you're willing. I know it's been a long few days." She looked at Ethan. "Go," he said. She looked back at Patterson. "This afternoon," she said. Ethan left them to it. He walked to 42 Main Street and stood in front of the door that no longer had a fraudulent padlock on it, and that now legally and clearly and on the court record belonged to Charlotte Bennett's lease and no one else's claim. He stood there for a while. He thought about what Patterson had said. 8 cases, 14 months. The Commissioner's office had been building that file while 8 different families or individuals had been trying to hold on to what was theirs against the slow, systemic pressure of a man who had decided that the rules were for other people. And none of those 8 cases had been enough on their own. A woman from St. Louis with a wagon full of goods and a lease agreement and a refusal to be frightened off had walked into the gap and filled it. He thought about the ridge where he'd found her, the boot in the rocks. "Please, I don't want to die out here alone." He put his hand flat on the door of the shop. "You made it," he said quietly to no one. Then he went to find a lumberyard, because the east-facing shelving wasn't going to build itself, and Tuesday was 4 days away. He was back at the shop by 3 in the afternoon, with lumber and the right nails and a level, and he spent the rest of the daylight measuring and cutting and fitting the shelving, while the town moved around him outside, and the empty room slowly stopped being empty, in the way he was beginning to understand it had always been headed toward. Charlotte came back at 5:30. She stopped in the doorway and looked at what he'd done. The east wall had a full run of shelving, 4 levels, solid level, properly anchored. The light from the front window fell across it in a way that would work well in the morning, which was when she'd said she wanted it most. She looked at the shelving. Then she looked at him. "You measured," she said. I always measure, he said. I said, I measured wrong. I know, so I measured again. She walked to the shelving and ran her hand along the second level. Tested the weight of it with both palms. It's perfect, she said. It's functional, he said. She turned around. Her eyes were bright in the late afternoon light. Same thing, she said. He set down his tools. Patterson finish with you, he said. We went 2 hours, she said. He was thorough. She moved to the center of the room and looked at the walls. He told me something at the end. What? He said Crawford is going to fight the commissioner's review. He said it could take 6 months, possibly a year, before it's fully resolved. And he said... She stopped. He said some of the 8 cases may not hold up because the documentation isn't as strong as mine. That some of those people might not get back what was taken from them, even with the review. Ethan looked at her. That bothers you, he said. Of course it bothers me. She said it simply without drama. I got my shop back. I got my lease restored. I got Crawford in front of a federal review. Those 8 families are still waiting, and some of them might wait and get nothing. She met his eyes. That's not justice. It's better than it was, but it's not justice. He held her gaze. No, he said. It's not. Is that how it always works out here? You get as much as the system gives you, and you're supposed to call it enough. Sometimes, he said. Not always. How do you live with the sometimes? He was quiet for a moment. It was a real question, and she was asking it really looking for an actual answer, not comfort. You do what you can from where you're standing, he said. And you make sure that what you build is solid enough that it helps the next person who needs it. He paused. You opened a shop. You think that's small. It's not. Millie said you're the first person who's pushed back at Crawford with something that sticks. People saw that. People in this town watched Pruitt back down. They watched Crawford walk out of that hotel dining room. They watched you walk into that courtroom. He held her gaze. You changed what's possible in this county. That's not nothing, Charlotte. She looked at him. You called me Charlotte, she said. It's your name. You've been calling me Charlotte since the mountain, she said. But it sounds different than it did. He held her gaze. He didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. She walked toward him. 3 steps across the same kind of 3 feet that had been between them in Millie's kitchen the night before, and she stopped directly in front of him close enough that he had to look down slightly to hold her eyes. I want to ask you something, she said, and I want an honest answer. All right, he said. When I leave here tonight and go back to the boarding house, are you going to ride back up to your mountain and spend the next month deciding whether what's happening between us is something you're allowed to have? He looked at her. Yes, he said. She nodded, slowly, like she'd expected that. Then I want you to know something before you go, she said, because you deserve to know it before you spend a month on that mountain thinking. What? I didn't come 600 miles to find someone to rescue me, she said. I came to build something real. And somewhere between the ridge and the courtroom you became part of what I'm building. Not because I need you to hold it up. Because a thing built well is built with people who understand what you're trying to make. She held his gaze without flinching. You understand what I'm trying to make, Ethan. Better than anyone I've ever met. And I think if you go up that mountain and think about it honestly, you already know that. He was quiet. He was very quiet for a long time. The shop was warm in the late afternoon. Outside he could hear the town a voice, a horse, a door somewhere down the street. The ordinary sounds of ordinary life going on around the extraordinary thing that was happening inside this small room. I lost someone, he said. And I decided that meant I didn't get to have this again. I decided it so completely that I stopped noticing I'd decided it. He looked at her. And then you opened your eyes on my mountain, and I have been arguing with that decision every day since. Which side is winning? She said. He reached up and very carefully tucked a strand of dark hair back from her face. The gesture was small and deliberate, and cost him something, the particular cost of a man who has kept his hands to himself for 7 years and is choosing not to. "You are," he said. She exhaled. It was a small sound, but it was the realest sound he'd heard in a long time. She put her hand against his chest, flat, steady over the place where the thing had been cracking open since the mountain. Not a dramatic gesture, just a hand, present, certain. "Don't go up the mountain alone," she said. "Not tonight." "Millie's table," he said. "Millie's table," she said. "And tomorrow you help me figure out the oven placement, and the day after that you tell me what time Cutter likes to be ridden in the summer morning, so I know when to have coffee ready." He looked at her. He looked at her for a long moment, in the way he hadn't let himself look at anything in a very long time directly, without protection, without the careful management of distance. "6," he said. "He likes an early start." She smiled, full and real and entirely unguarded. "6 it is," she said. She went to get her coat from the nail by the door, and Ethan Cole stood in the middle of a shop that smelled like fresh sawdust and possibility, and he felt something in him that he had spent 7 years learning to live without settle back into place, like a stone finding its footing in a creek bed, quietly without announcement, with the particular solidity of a thing returning to where it was always supposed to be. They walked to Millie's together. She talked about Tuesday, about which preserves she'd put in the front window, about whether the bread should go on the east shelving or the counter, about a sign she wanted to paint herself something simple, just her name, and the word "open" in letters big enough to be read from the road. He listened. At Millie's door he held it open for her. She looked at him as she passed. A single look, quick and private, the kind that belonged entirely to the two of them, and that didn't need to be explained to anyone else. He followed her inside. He ate supper at Millie Dawson's table for the second time in 3 days. And he talked more than he had talked at any table in 7 years. And Millie watched both of them with the expression of a woman who had seen enough of life to know when something real was happening in front of her and had the good sense not to interrupt it. The next morning he was there at the shop before 7. She was already there. She'd come early to measure for the counter placement, she said, but he noticed the coffee was hot, and there were 2 cups, and she looked like she'd been waiting in the way. People wait when they want something to happen, and have decided to be honest about it. He drank his coffee. They measured the counter placement. It took 4 days to get the shop ready. He built the counter. He fixed the back door that hung wrong. He reinforced the ceiling beam that wasn't structural but was old enough to worry him. He drove her to Miller's Crossing in the wagon to pick up the oven parts and helped her assemble them on the kitchen side of the shop while she talked through her bread recipe in a way that was half explaining to him and half working it out for herself. She baked the first test loaves on Sunday. She brought one up to his ranch that evening, wrapped in cloth, still warm, with a small jar of the plum preserves she'd put up from Millie's garden fruit. He ate half of it standing at his kitchen counter. "Well," she said. "It's good," he said. "Good or good." "The second one," he said. She looked pleased in a way she wasn't trying to hide. She stayed for an hour. They sat on the porch, him in the chair, her on the step below, both of them looking out at the mountain, the way you look at something when you're not really looking at it, but the being there together is the thing. "You know what I noticed," she said. "What?" "You've got flowers coming up on the south side of the cabin, wild ones. They're almost to the windowsill." He looked. He hadn't noticed. He'd stopped noticing things like that a long time ago. "Margaret planted them," he said. "It came out simply without the usual weight. She said the cabin needed color." Charlotte looked at the flowers. "She was right," she said. He looked at the flowers. "She was usually right," he said. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to hear more about her sometime, if you'd like to tell me." He looked at her. In 7 years, no one had asked that. People avoided Margaret's name around him the way people avoid the name of any grief they don't know how to hold. Charlotte was asking like it was a normal thing to ask, like it was the kind of thing 2 people who were building something together would naturally do, make room for what came before. "Sometime," he said. She nodded. "I should go," she said. "Early morning tomorrow." "First day," he said. First day, she agreed. She stood, looked at him. Come by. I'll be there, he said. She smiled, walked to her horse, rode back down the mountain in the last light. He sat on the porch alone. The mountain was quiet around him, the same quiet it had always been. But it was a different quality of quiet now, not the quiet of absence. The quiet of a space between things, before and after. The held breath between one part of a life and the next. He looked at the flowers on the south side of the cabin. She's something, he said. The mountain didn't answer. It never did. But the quiet felt different when he said it. Fuller, less like an ending. He went inside and slept better than he had in 7 years. Tuesday morning, Charlotte Bennett opened her shop at 42 Main Street in Ridgecrest, Montana Territory. There was bread in the window. 3 kinds arranged on the east shelving that caught the morning light exactly as she'd said it would. Preserves in 4 flavors. A handwork table in the corner with 3 pieces she'd finished in the evenings at Millie's, each one careful and detailed, and made like it was going to last. The sign on the door said Bennett's in letters she'd painted herself dark blue on white, big enough to read from the road. Ethan was there when she unlocked the door. He stood on the boardwalk and watched her put the key in the lock and turn it and push the door open and step back to see it from the outside. She stood there looking at it. Well, he said. She turned to him. Her eyes were bright. Her chin was up. Her whole face was something that he was going to be seeing in his mind for a long time. The particular look of a person who decided something was possible and then made it true. It's exactly right, she said. The first customer came in 11 minutes. A woman who'd watched the courtroom events from a distance and had come to say so in the form of buying a loaf of bread. Then a man from the feed store next door. Then Millie with 2 of her boarding house guests. By mid-morning, there was a small but steady movement in and out of that door. Ethan stayed on the periphery. He wasn't a man who occupied the center of rooms easily. He stood where he could see the door, and he watched the morning happen, and he watched Charlotte move through her shop like she'd been there for years already, talking to people, easy and direct, making each person feel attended to without making them feel managed. Greaves came in at 11. He bought a jar of preserves and stood next to Ethan at the edge of the room. Crawford's lawyer filed the first response to the commissioner's review this morning. Greaves said quietly, Expected, Ethan said. It's going to be a long process. I know. He'll try to slow it at every turn. He'll fail at every turn, Ethan said. Harlan's involved now. Patterson's office has the complete file. Crawford can fight, but he can't win. Greaves looked at Charlotte across the shop, at the way she was with people, at the bread on the shelving and the preserves and the handwork and the sign on the door. She changed this town in 5 days, Greaves said. She changed it in 3, Ethan said. The last 2 were just cleanup. Greaves almost laughed. He put his hat on. Good morning, Cole. He walked out. Charlotte caught Ethan's eye from across the room. A quick look, just a moment. Then she turned back to her customer. He felt it in the way he'd been feeling everything lately differently than before. Not managed down into the quiet place where he'd learned to put things that were too large. Just felt. Directly. Without the walls between it and him. At noon she came to where he was standing. Go eat something, she said. You've been standing there since 8. I'm fine, he said. You're going to fall over. Mountain men don't fall over. Mountain men who haven't eaten since dawn do, she said. She pressed a cloth-wrapped bundle into his hands. Bread and cheese, Millie's cold ham. Go. He looked at the bundle. You made me lunch, he said. I made myself lunch, and there was extra, she said. Don't make it strange. He looked at her. She looked back. Charlotte, he said. Ethan, she said. I'm going to say something, and I'd like you to just hear it without... I'll try, she said. He held the lunch she'd made him. He stood in the doorway of her shop that he'd helped build. Outside Main Street moved around them in the ordinary way of a Tuesday in a small town, horses and wagons, and voices, and the particular alive sound of a place going about its business. I spent 7 years convincing myself that what I had was enough, he said. The mountain, the ranch, the quiet. I was good at it. I got very good at it." He held her gaze. "You undid 7 years of very good work in about 4 days, and I want you to know that I'm not angry about it. I'm the opposite of angry about it. I don't have the right word for the opposite, but I know what it feels like." She looked at him for a long time. "Ethan Cole," she said, "are you trying to tell me something?" "I'm telling you that I'd like to keep showing up," he said. "At 6 in the morning when Cutter's ready. At the shop when the shelving needs work. At Millie's table for supper. Wherever you are when you need a second person." He paused. "And I'd like you to keep showing up on my mountain. With bread and honest opinions and that look you get when you're about to say something true that you know I need to hear." Her eyes were bright. "That's it," she said. "That's it," he said. "No conditions, no caveats, no spending a month on the mountain thinking it through." "I already thought it through," he said. "I thought it through Sunday night on the porch. It didn't take as long as I expected." She stepped closer. "I'm going to be difficult sometimes," she said. "I make decisions fast, and I don't always explain them, and I have opinions about how shelving should be built, even when I'm wrong." "I noticed," he said. "I'm not easy." "I don't need easy," he said. "I need real. You're real." She reached up and put her hand against his jaw. Steady, certain. Like everything she did, no hedging, no testing, just the thing itself. "I'm going to build something lasting here," she said quietly. "This shop, this town, this life, and I want you in it. Every ordinary Tuesday of it, every hard part, and every good part." Her thumb moved slightly against his jaw. "Are you in?" He covered her hand with his. "I'm in," he said. She smiled. That smile. The one that started in her eyes before it reached her mouth, and that he was starting to understand was only for moments she meant completely. "Good," she said. "Now go eat. You have shelving to finish this afternoon." He went. He sat on the bench outside the shop in the summer noon heat and ate the lunch she'd made him and watched Main Street go about its business and felt the weight of 7 years of careful, managed, necessary quiet, finally completely and without apology, lift off his chest. Across the street, 2 women he didn't recognize stopped in front of the Bennett sign and went inside. Charlotte's voice carried through the open door, warm, clear, welcoming. He listened to it. He finished the lunch, folded the cloth carefully. He went back inside. He had shelving to finish. And for the first time in 7 years, Ethan Cole understood with complete and unguarded certainty the difference between a life that is survived and a life that is lived, and he chose without hesitation, without condition, and without ever looking back to live his.